Not gonna lie though, it's actually quite nice to have I love D Money to death. He's the co-host, but it's really nice switching it up every now and then to get a couple new faces into the podcast. Not gonna lie. So I'm honored that you said yes and that you'd come be a part of this. So if you are set to go, let's do it. Cool.
Yep. Yeah, I'm good.
Perfect. All right. Let's welcome everyone in and say, welcome, welcome to the Beyond Infinite podcast. My name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming. And once again, we have OTA'd our co host. We have removed D Money officially from the broadcast. He is in move this week to Japan. So he's a little preoccupied. He's a little busy, to say the least. So I decided to reach out to someone after seeing a tweet that really caught my eye. I immediately knew that she was going to be someone I wanted to speak to this week. So if you do not know Lauren, you're about to get to know LaurenWhatevs. Hello, hello, hello. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of this because I I need some help talking about Cannonball, and I know you're the right person to talk to. So fingers crossed. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed we can actually have a good conversation about him, or at least a constructive conversation about him, because I was very pessimistic going into it, very hesitant, and you were exactly the opposite. So, with that predecessor, please let the people know a little bit about who you are if they do not know who you are.
Okay. I started as Lauren Whatever, which I think is how you introduced me, but I've switched it to Lauren Whatevs.
Yeah,
Either way's
I'm an
fine,
OG.
really.
I'm an OG.
Yeah, you've been around longer. So I started by writing for Marvel Snap Zone. Basically, I came from a long background of data analysis, and I'm looking at the sites that have data, and I'm like, you guys are not doing enough with this. Like, there's so many more interesting things you could be doing than win rate and cube rate. So I was going to reach out to them one by one, and the first one I reached out to, Snap Zone, was like, yeah, you could write to us. We'll give you access to our data. Cool. So I'm only writing there about once a month right now. It's been even longer than that because I am really stuck on my current article. But I write math heavy things that take the data from people using the SnapZone tracker and try to do interesting things like what deck is getting cubes the fastest in like minutes, or how good is it to play into locations that are unrevealed. So you can find that stuff there.
You've been doing a lot of insane data analysis for it's got to be upwards a year plus at this point with them, right?
It's really close to a year. I think
Yeah.
my first one was in April.
Okay. So about a year doing this super analytical breakdown of really looking at what, Marvel Snap has to offer when it comes to, okay, this is the data of a large group of people. And we understand all the trackers, it's not the entire pool of people, but when we have data changes and when we have deck information that we have never really been able to look at in the masses like the way you do, I really respect your opinion on looking at data in a different way because you are looking at it from a statistical analysis point in the masses first, not personal opinion. And and I mean, I can speak to experience from writing on this way too, where very often you feel like a lot of people will write and a lot of people will comment about Marvel Snap exclusively on opinion rather than this is the data. So when we had the OTA come on through this week, I feel like it's going to be an interesting topic to talk about with you because you've seen things in the past. You've seen card changes come and go. You've seen the effects of how damaging, Captain Marvel used to be when she was in her full glory firsthand in large quantities like that. So I'm excited to have you here today, and we are going to lead off today with the patch. Let's talk about the patch because there was a lot specifically targeted to Thanos and to discard. I think obviously it's a little bit more on Thanos, but I'll lead in with this question for you first. Which do you think is the more impactful change for Thanos? And why is it Mind Stone over Psylocke?
Yeah, it's definitely Mind Stone. Mind Stone just slows down the deck, right? Like it used to be the free snap condition. Um, not as much recently as it used to be, but still
Yeah.
like totally a Thanos snap condition. And also now with Mockingbird being a huge part of the Thanos deck, Mind Stone slows down Mockingbird quite a bit. Um, I mean, I don't know that it fully slows her down. I've heard of people still seeing Mockingbird and Magneto coming down on turn 6, but hopefully that happens less often. I think it will.
I think,
Uh, Psylocke is ramp.
well, I guess right now, looking at the two different changes, because, Mind Stone going to a 2-1 and Psylocke also going to a 2-1. I think you basically have to look at the deck, Thanos in general, right now, as moving away from the ramp style of, okay, we had the change to the time stone, so now it's less predictable. We're changing the accessibility on the Mind Stone. We're weakening Psylocke. The idea of Thanos for so long was loaded with an ungodly amount of big, epic 6 drops that you can cheat out as many ways as possible. Like, when was the last time you saw Scar in a 6 drop focused style Thanos deck? You don't, because that evolution has already, in my opinion, probably now finished with this change. Psylocke in particular was a huge motivator of making that happen. And now we have Hope Summers, which was also giving you that mana acceleration. It just doesn't feel like it's that type of deck anymore. Now it's about trying to figure out. I feel like we're going to start moving towards this non-Shang-Chiable tempo version of Thanos, where we start seeing, Mockingbird staying under Shang-Chi range for now. I think that'll probably change in the future personally. But, that kind of a feel. We see Gladiator starting to make these decks. I saw some builds already today with other changes that we'll talk about that are featuring Star-Lord, like 2 6s and 3 8s, like all these like non-Shang-Chiable big giant cards for their cost. And with Mind Stone going to 2-1 in particular, yes, it does slow down Mockingbird, but I feel like the biggest change for Mind Stone is it's actually, to me, the stone you want to least draw, where that used to be the Power Stone. And now I don't want to touch the Mind Stone at all. I'd rather have less big cards and put in more tech. I'd put in a Kyera again. I'd put in a Wave again. I'd put in, these other ones that have come and gone and you're always choosing between, rather than having to play the Mind Stone and get a couple of 1-drops. I feel like this is now, in that one change, the weakest stone in the deck.
Hmm. So they said it was the strongest, right?
Right.
So I don't know if it's enough to make it the the weakest. It still draws 2 cards, which means if you play it, hopefully the rest of your draws are stronger.
Mhm.
Um,
But it's the same
but
thing
yeah,
as
it's
playing, imagine playing
looking it up.
Space Stone and Reality Stone for the same 2, and you get 2 card draws of random cards versus the Mind Stone, which is 2 1 costs. So it's
Yeah,
like it's the for turn 2, I would rather have almost any other 2 stones, card draw or not. I'd rather any other 2 stones
yeah,
versus playing the Mind Stone as a catch-up mechanic to, oh, I really need all my stones. Maybe, unless if you have Hope Summers and you're trying to do some catchy, cheeky thing on turn 5 in particular, which I just can't fully fathom. But it just feels like, and I find it interesting that they worded it this way. They know it's an unusual approach and it's a temporary approach, clearly. So I'll throw to you, because they don't like the idea of having it only draw 1 card. What would you do with the Mind Stone in particular if this is not the final iteration of what it will be?
oh,
Put you on the spot.
yeah.
Welcome to the podcast.
See, when they talk
Think.
about it, right? When they talk about it being temporary, I'm thinking like bigger changes to Thanos, not the Mind Stone itself.
Mhm.
Um, because yeah, I mean, changing to 1 draw is like the obvious thing. Maybe it's draw 2 of any card. I don't. Is that stronger or
Oh
weaker?
my god, that's scary. It's
It's got to
1
be
space
stronger,
but
right?
draws 2. Like it's exactly what we were talking about earlier, where it's referring you to Space Stone plus Reality Stone or Mind Stone. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah, but Mind Stone can make it so you can draw Reality Stone and Mind and Time Stone the
Mhm.
next turn, like,
True.
so you can keep your,
The
so
flow.
look, if you Mind Stone first, then the draws you get from the next stones are stronger draws. Um, but maybe they're just all strong draws if you let the Mind Stone
Mhm.
draw other cards.
Do you lean heavily into the lore side of it where you feel like all the stones all need to be one cost though? Because I know a lot of people got rattled by that. Like, is that a limiting factor in trying to figure out a resolution for what the Mind Stone could be? That, oh, it really should be a one cost like all the others. Maybe it's a 1/2 with a weaker effect because we have the Power Stone in there too. Like, is that important to making it Thanos E?
I think that you lean into lore whenever possible and theming, but gameplay is ultimately the most important factor. And I think we see them do that a lot, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Agreed.
where they like, I mean, some characters where their abilities are only like very loosely related to them. Um,
Zabu, Shana, and
like
Kazar. That's your perfect package example.
there's a great one. Yes,
Right.
Shauna makes a lot of sense as a forecast, so she can work with Zabu, but just like they tried and they couldn't make it work that way. So now she's 3 cost, and it's like she's not tied to them at all. I guess she's still tied to Kazar. Uh,
Not to Zabu the way that they wanted
yeah,
her to be. And it's the same idea with the Mind Stone. Like, if they kept the Mind Stone at a 2/1 with this same specific effect, I think it deters the idea even further of looking to maybe get that Thanos at to 620 as a playable option. Because when all the stones are one cost, I feel like that maybe there is that potential option that you can take advantage of that and you can think about maybe really using it, and it's a play line. But this is essentially by adding on another 16% worth of mana into making that equation happen. That's a big deal to me. And I think with that being an important factor of what Thanos's effect in particular is, I think they'd either A, have to balance Thanos by making him actual Thanos a stronger card himself to give a bigger reward for achieving that, or they have to look at what the Mind Stone's main purpose is, which is essentially drawing one cost cards. If you're going to do that, how can you do that effectively? But maybe it's a mana exchange. Maybe it's just making the Mind Stone a 1/0 or a 1-1 or something counterbalancing where
mhm.
now you really want to put Thanos out there. You want to get the other stones out there to undo what the Mind Stone did for you. Something along those lines, maybe.
Yeah, I like. I imagine they tried it, but I like
Yeah.
1-0 or 1-1. And I do like the theming of them all being 1 cost. But I think I agree that it's more interesting for Mind Stone to draw 2 cards
Hmm.
than it is for it to match in 1 cost. Like if we can't have both of those, I think the drawing 2 is more interesting.
Maybe it's the 1-1 and it's two random cards. So it's kind of got this hood feel to it in the sense of like there is a big downside to playing this card, but the upside is incredibly good. So if you get all of
Yeah.
them, they all interject and they all work together, and the collective power on the board over all 7 cards is, maybe 2 power larger, and you make Thanos like a 6/12 in the process, and now he's an actual viable card to play solo at the very end of the game, whether he's got the buff or not, like something along those lines. There's got to be something
Oh,
that
yeah.
balances out that huge benefit. And whenever I think of huge benefit, I think negative downside. I think of the hood and I think of Mr. Negative. So maybe that's the direction they got to go with Mind Stone, because I think the Psylocke effect change of just weakening her is exclusively focused towards changing how we use Thanos by deterring us away from wanting to load it with a bunch of 6 cost cards and then cheat out those via Lockjaw and the Mind Stone, sorry, and the Time Stone and all of the past mechanics. Those are all basically gone. She was kind of the last saving grace of being able to control Professor X on 4, and now it's just all up in the air again because that 1 power, as we see on any card, makes a huge difference. Like Captain Marvel, who got her power back the same way. Do you like, because I know you saw the old Captain Marvel in its full glory, all the great, she was winning so many games all by herself. Do you think
Hmm.
Captain Marvel has a place in this current metagame at 4-5?
Yes, she but
There's the
yeah,
but.
I don't think. Yeah, I just don't think that she's nearly as much of a threat as she was last time she was a 4/5.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. Move's kind of scary, and that's if I'm remembering correctly, that's where she was in like silky smooth type decks
Yeah,
the
for a little while.
most. Um,
That and a lot
yeah,
of
with
the
like
old school
working with Elsa and
Black
Angelin.
Bolt.
Oh, okay, yeah. Hmm. My favorite way to use her is with Storm.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and Lockdown, I just don't. Lockdown just it's they took away Spider-Man, they weakened Professor X, and Lockdown is just not the same that it used to be, and I don't know if it ever will be again.
Well, I mean, with War Machine coming out this week, who we'll get to a little bit later in the podcast, yeah, I think Lockdown is in a very, very precarious place, I think is the most polite way to word that. But I think with Captain, like for me, this Captain Marvel change in particular, I have one leaning hope with her, and that's a weird backup plan for Cerebro 5 lockdown type of deck where you've got Wave and Captain Marvel and Doctor Doom, and then you play out whether it's play out your Storm at some point. Like that's the only kind of what you were saying is the way you would previously use her. I think something along those lines might be, with Silk, who can also move in there, like something along that movement combo with a lockout via Storm. I think that might have enough legs to finally give Cerebro 5 what it needs, which is another win condition. And it's an actual possible deck to me. I think that the change between Captain Marvel and even Adam Warlock, that maybe this is finally what could put us over the edge there. But me personally, Captain Marvel, thinking of her in a Zabu deck now at 3-5 makes a lot more sense than it did before because 3-5 is a good stat line. And I think we maybe start to revisit old Zabu decks with new cards. We've had a lot of crazy 4-drops come down in the last, couple of months since the prominence of Zabu, that maybe Captain Marvel becomes a viable threat again. Maybe Storm becomes the most important card in the game again. I don't know. I don't know. But do you think, am I crazy?
If
Am
we're
I copium with Warlock though?
he was specifically called out in the patch. Well, Cerebro 5 was specifically called out in the patch notes, right?
Right.
Like, we think he can go to 5/6, but we're stopping at 5/5 in case Cerebro 5 is the right place for him. While we're talking about Storm Cerebro 5, we can talk about Rocket Raccoon.
This is true. Rocket Raccoon now belongs there. I mean, Rocket Raccoon, I'm gonna quote KM Best for a second here and say, why would I ever want to play Martyr? Because now we have
Yep.
Ant-Man, now we have Rocket Raccoon, who's now shooting up to 5 power in total. Why would I ever want to? And Titania exists also. Why
And
would I
Titania.
ever want to play Martyr? There's literally no reason for her in Marvel Snap now because Rocket Raccoon was a part of a 5-card adjustment for all of the Guardians, making them universally all +4 power. And I think for me, the bigger buff with Rocket Raccoon is actually Shauna. I think that that's the biggest winner, not Rocket Raccoon. I feel like I get him every time out of Shauna. Is it like that's my guaranteed card? It's Rocket Raccoon every time.
Yeah, but that's a lot better than like Zero or
Mm.
I don't know. I
Oh,
feel like
Iron
there's some bad
Fist.
ones
No, no, no.
that
I get
popped up.
Iron Fist also.
Iron Fist can be a pain because then he hits Shauna, right?
Mm-hmm. Every
Uh,
time.
yeah. I'm with you on Martyr, and I don't know how you fix her because I think if she's, I like that she matches Captain Marvel in power. I think that's interesting. But if she goes up, higher, she moves even less often. Like Glenn has said that, like we can't make her too strong because then she just never moves. Um, Zero cost. Make her a 0-2 or a 0-3.
Ooh. Ooh, what do you think about that? Ooh, and that's to all of my listeners and all of our viewers, a 0-3 martyr. That's a scary thought. That'd be a really good, awesome, awful, chaotic card all at the same time. Like I would experiment with that. I'd be
Oh
intrigued.
yeah,
Cerebro
zeros
3
are
with that shit.
powerful.
Oh man. Ooh. Ooh. Copium. All right. But back on the Copium with the Rocket Raccoon for a second, because I do want to talk about, the Guardian changes, because
Yeah.
they have been trying for so long to get the Guardians right. And now making them all universal, all of them are +4 rather than you get some +2 and you get +5 and you get +3. It's no, just everybody gets +4. Everybody's in the same party. But I look at the top end of all of them. I look at Rocket Raccoon, who maxes at 1.5, Star-Lord at 2.6, Groot at 3.7, Drax at 4.9, and Gamora still at the same 5.12. And I just feel like somebody at second dinner had a small animal beaten by Groot, because somebody just does not like Groot, because you have other 3 drops at this power that have a big negative downside, and the cost condition to me just doesn't make sense. I feel like Groot deserved to go to 3.8 here in total. He should have
Mm.
kept his 3.4 stat line. He should have gone to be a condition equivocally able to keep up with Gladiator, because Gladiator's the bar, in my opinion. Like, am I just pessimistic on that? Because I feel like somebody just doesn't like Groot in second dinner, and I don't know what they did to them.
3-4 that misses is, well, I guess that's the vanilla stat line, isn't it?
Gamora's a 5.8.
So yeah.
5.8 that misses. Okay.
All right. Yeah. You're selling me on this. I'm like, if Groot's a 3-8, do you play Drax at 4-9? You could bump him to 4-10, but then he's shingable.
Right. And I understand them wanting to keep him down below Shang-Chi level. Like, I had put out personally like OTA projections on Tuesday of things that I wanted to see. Captain Marvel to 4.5 was exactly one of them. And I also specifically called out
Mm.
Groot and Drax. I wanted Groot and Drax to go to 8 and 10. I did want them to hit those
Yeah.
thresholds. I get what they're saying though by looking at, Star-Lord, Groot, and Drax, 6 to 7 to 9, like 4 cost. There's a big jump going into 4 cost, and definitely an even larger jump going into 5 cost, as there well should be for top power potential. But I still feel like, because specifically Gladiator exists and Groot's condition at 3 cost is very difficult to make happen, because I used to run Groot in a Surfer deck way, way, way back ago.
Hmm.
And he used to be basically how I would treat Sebastian Shaw now. I used to work with Groot. You're looking to buff him up, with a Koye and Nakia and that kind of stuff in your hand, and then you play him out at the very end, and then let Surfer do its thing. That's how I was playing Groot. And this version of Groot feels very similar, but I still would take Gladiator, because there's the chance of that downside is so low when you've got a beefed up Gladiator or a beefed up Shaw in your hand doing the exact same thing. So, because I don't know where else you would want to use Groot
Yeah.
outside of maybe a Jean Grey deck.
Right. I was thinking the problem the problem with Groot is that later in the game he's so much easier to hit, and so his ability becomes a smaller downside. But then if you're playing Gladiator late game, maybe he's played in a full lane, and so his downside goes away too.
Right.
Uh, all right. I'm sold. Let's do a 3-8 Groot and a 4-10 Drax.
Yeah. I can live with 410 Drax, because Cull Obsidian now exists. We have Typhoid Mary. We have
There's so
Atuma.
many
Like,
4-10s.
410 is the
And Sentry.
appropriate ceiling. And I think they are restricting Drax very similarly because they're scared of cards like Rescue getting too good. They're scared of Jessica Jones, who's very early game. She's an intro, very important card. You don't want that necessarily affecting the very beginning of the player experience. I can understand the fear consistently because once Shang-Chi enters your collection for the very first time, it's a whole new game. It's a completely different game once you have access to Shang-Chi. And you don't want these cards' value to disappear. The problem is, it doesn't disappear because of the threat of being Shang-Chi'd. It disappears because you now have Shang-Chi, and you'd rather play that over Drax with a chance. I'll take that 2-cost, potential swing if need may be. And Gamora, to me, this is a buff overall for Gamora, with her getting the 5/8 base, where if you
Yeah,
whiff, it's now a 5/8. Like,
of course it's a buff. Yeah, because
yeah.
she's the same if you hit her. I think if we're buffing everybody, all right, Groot and Drax, I think Gamora could be 513, right? Like,
Ooh.
uh, Spider Woman is a very easy thing to make more valuable than Gamora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it would make sense for peak Gamora to beat peak Spider Woman.
I'm down for that because Spider-Woman, I think, is a card that, you know, unfortunately gets very pigeonholed to a lot of toxic decks where I only need it to afflict so I can cheapen something else. And it's a non-Shang-Chi-able 5/12 conditionally. And
Yeah,
if it hits
it's really
2
underrated.
cards, it's a non-Shang-Chi-able 5/10. Like, that feels incredibly strong, yet we never go, you know what card I want to put in here? Spider-Woman. Like, it you always go Gamora. You always say Gamora. And now I think you say it even more. I think you lean even heavier into Gamora because you don't feel bad whiffing if you miss. Spider-Woman was that was her advantage previously. Now they're on par. And now Spider-Woman,
Hmm.
if it's not Affliction, I'm not going to be playing Spider-Woman. I'm always going to be taking Gamora because now it's the same.
All right. I mean, I think it's not really the same if she whiffs though, because you're almost always hitting at least one thing with Spider Woman, right? Like, why would you play
Ideally,
Spider Woman
yeah.
in an empty lane?
Exactly. Ideally, it's always going to be more. But if I'm looking at because the other thing with Gamora is that it doesn't need to have the reveal. So like when you think about a priority play it's a condition for your Galactus deck, right? You've waived Galactus and now you Gamora. If you've got the prio, Gamora is going to get that extra buff, but Spider-Woman's not going to afflict the
Mm,
other card. So
yeah, that's true.
it just depends on when it's going to hit and how important is that add-on because you're playing into revealed, playing into clogged, which we're seeing more and more and more. Obviously, clog is an incredibly, rising archetype for all the right and proper reasons. It's an interference deck, and we're seeing that become important in Marvel Snap. I think that maybe there ends up being something along those lines with some kind of clog interference Guardians deck. I'm already like theory crafting around that. We've seen the move Jean Grey decks. I'm trying to make different fun things that bring back Groot. Let's make Groot great again. Let's make Drax great again because they've
Yeah.
always been absolute crap.
Well, so kind of talking about a Quad Guardians deck, if you hit Rocket, Star Lord, and Groot all on turn 6, it's what, 618, something like that?
Rocket, Star Lord,
Six
and Groot. That'd be
and
5,
5?
6, and 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be
Uh,
18 power.
618. That's what else is a 618? Evo Hulk?
Yeah. If you draw it early enough,
I
yeah.
mean, it's 3 cards in your hand, so it's not comparable, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, maybe there's something there with a Clog Guardians deck.
Even if I guess the hard part about Clog Guardians to me is trying to figure out how to clog the other lanes and when it's more important for you to use. Like, I like that tactic idea of Rocket, Raccoon, Star Lord, and Groot being like turn 6 plays specifically. So maybe there's a hybrid Drac dump, type deck that removes all these cheap cards at the very end because you've loaded debris out on the board and you've dracked out a whole bunch of crap and you left your big infinite in your hand. I don't know, something along those lines. That could be fun, could be interesting. Get that targeting play. You got me intrigued. But because I hadn't thought about that with those 3 cards versus like trying to play out all 3 on one turn, or even 2 of them on one turn. Even if you play Star Lord and Groot on turn 5, that alone, that's 5
A
mana
lot of
for the
power.
equivalent of 7 plus 6. That's 13. There's your 513.
Pretty
It's pretty
good.
good. Pretty good for me. I'm cool with that. Storm into Groot and Raccoon. That's 7 and 5. That's a 412. I like it. I like it. Maybe the poor old Drax. All right. With the Clog conversation, though, everybody gets love except Drax. With the Clog conversation, though, let's talk about the reason that you're here. Uh, the reason that I contacted you specifically was because I kept seeing on Twitter, X, Schwitter, whatever you want to call it, you were professing love for Cannonball. That you
Yeah.
thought this was going to be a great card, that you're hyped up about it. You're excited to see Cannonball in a variety of different styles and decks. Now, I did my initial review. I played Cannonball for like 2.5 days straight, whatever it's been now. Variety of different styles of decks. Some decks work great, some decks don't work great. Tell us your thoughts prior to Cannonball, as you were playing, and where you are now.
Yeah. Prior to Cannonball, I had him number 1 for the season. When Pulse Glazer sends out like tons of content creators before the season starts, he asks us all to rank them, and
Yep.
I had Cannonball at number 1. So I was extremely high on Cannonball. Um, I saw him as a single card lane winner. Like it doesn't need any combo at all. Single handedly wins a lane. Um, Sometimes even if he is the only card in that lane, right? Like it's just a lot of power if he's moving something that's moving or destroying something that's a 10. He's a 518. Like that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then of course, if he is moving something big, there's the downside of you don't know which lane it's going to. Assuming there's no lockdown or clog going on. And so I'm okay. Worst case scenario, he turns bad situations into 50-50s, like kind of a get out of jail free card if you didn't retreat when you should have. Um, yeah, so I just thought he reminded me a lot of my favorite card in the game, which is Valkyrie. Like 5 cost card you want to play on the
Mm,
last turn, and that's a
yeah.
hard place to be, but you can work with it. I've played a lot of Valkyrie and Demon on turn 6.
Yeah.
Um, and you can make it just seemed to me like, okay, he's backup Valkyrie. Like I'm gonna make a deck where if I don't draw Valkyrie, I can play Cannonball instead. He's gonna win a lane, and I just have to figure out what to do in the other one.
And now that you've had 2 days of testing Cannonball,
Uh,
now where do you sit with it?
uh, yeah, I still think he's very good, and I'm surprised at how poor his stats are. My best guess is people aren't playing him right. Um, I don't know if that means they're playing him on turn 5 or if they're just not putting him in a deck that supports him. I think he is. He's still not. I don't. He's not a combo card. He's a single card lane winner, but he really likes support. I think the lockdown and clog are more important now than I did before. Um, the other thing that I discovered since he released is that when you're building the deck, it tends to be really top heavy. Like if you're looking, Professor X for lockdown or Hobgoblin for clog or Doctor Octopus for clog, it's like, am I
Yeah.
going to run all of these cards? Am I going to run Alioth or Valkyrie as my alternative lane winner? And now my entire top half of my deck is 5 cost and 6 cost, and that's not really doable. Um, so I guess I should. Before I thought he was a much more flexible card, and now I don't think he's as flexible, but I still think he's very strong in the right deck.
So I went in with the mindset of I wanted to try to use him as a control card first. I think that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the more I looked into move and trying to see, knock him out into a Craven lane or into a Kingpin lane, like it seemed like it was cheeky, but he had a small upside to him versus what a lot of people were comparing him to, which is Stegron. And Stegron does literally the exact same thing, but for cheaper and a little bit less power, but just can't destroy a card, or I should say, destroy slash convert into a rock. And
And it's random.
yeah, and it's random, right? And it's random. So the purpose of doing it in that type of deck, of trying to move your opponent's cards, a Spider-Man, Stagron, like that kind of deck, tried it, never felt good. Put them into clog focused variations, and now it started to feel a little better. And as you kind of talk about similarly, the most common way that I found success with him was using Storm as a sacrificial lamb and saying, I'm going to storm this lane,
Mm.
leave that lane alone, because what happens most of the time when you storm a lane? The following turn, they're going to also try to contest that lane in some way, shape, or form. So they're wasting resources throwing it into the storm lane while you're trying to build a lane for you to Professor X on turn 5 and then cannonball over the big card out into that dead lane on turn 6. So you could do it one of two ways. You could either cannonball it or you could Goliath it. And with the right clogging mechanics, you could get away with doing that pretty regularly. I had a great click of using Cannonball as a counter to Galactus because, oh dear God, that felt amazing. Oh man, does
That's
that
such a
feel
good
good?
clip.
It's such a good feeling. They Galactus and you have Cannonball in that lane and they reveal and then you just convert it into a big giant rock. You may eat worlds, but I can turn you into a rock. Like there are random little moments that Cannonball feels really, really good. Like really good. But I guess for me, the bigger play of if I'm clogging other lanes, most of the time, keywording, most of the time, I felt like going into the final turn with that lane, I ended up having priority because I was using Storm as a sacrifice lane. So I was already focusing on two other lanes.
Mm.
And I'm building those and building those, and I'm going into the turn 6, and I didn't need Cannonball necessarily. I could yeet over, but just as equally, I can ally,
Mm.
and that's a guarantee.
Yeah.
So that's where I get stuck with Cannonball because I really like him. I think he's an incredibly fun card, and he's got such a unique mechanic with Clog, on the rise right now in Marvel Snap that I wish he was just slightly better somehow. And I just don't know what that how is. Like, I don't know if it's more power or another effect or like they've clearly buffed him because they wanted him to be good. And you're very high on him based on
Yeah.
these mechanics, but he's a C tier card for me after all this testing.
So I think I would not be surprised to see him go to 5.9 or 5.10. I don't think it really improves his win rate. It might improve his play rate, but I don't think it really makes a difference on his win rate. It's his
Yeah.
ability that works. I mean, earlier versions of the ability, he left a rock behind when he moved a card. That would make him a lot more playable on turn 5. Yeah, I think. See, I have avoided priority with him, which makes him a risk for Eliath, but
Right.
otherwise it makes his ability stronger. And then the thing I'm trying to do is have Titania clogging a lane, and I'm using a 1-cost card to bring Titania back. So Cannonball one lane, bring Titania back in the other lane. Really, really powerful. Feels free almost every time I have it set up correctly.
You always feel good doing that Green
But
Goblin Titania combo into a lane on turn 4. That
that was
always feels
so
good.
good.
If you can pull it off, because
Yeah.
I feel like I never can. I hate running Titania. I hate it. I can never do it right. I have tried so many combinations of feeling good about it, but unless if I have thrown priority on turn 6, I never feel good playing Titania.
Okay, so the other secret sauce that, like, because I just was experimenting a ton with Cannonball, the other secret sauce was Daredevil.
Oh yeah,
Daredevil made
no,
it
he was in the deck too.
extremely
Yeah,
easy with or without Titania. He makes it very easy to ensure something is clogged on turn 5, and also makes Titania predictable. Like, I know how many cards my opponent is playing in the Titania lane. I can play the correct amount to make sure Titania ends there. Um, but like, the more I'm talking about, like, you got to use Titania and Daredevil, and it's like, this is where Cannonball is like, okay, yeah, he's not as good as I thought because he's just not as flexible. Like the places I found for him to be strong in is it's like clog and lockdown, and it has to be like a reliable clog, which is a lot of your deck dedicated to clogging.
Yeah, it's constant. It's a constant fear with him because you want to use him very often on turn 5 because he's good stats. You're like, okay, this makes sense, and then I'll deal with the after effects afterwards, and that just never felt like a successful way to play him. He consistently feels like a card that you want to play on turn 6. So maybe there's some mechanic in there that invites Cannonball to be a turn 6 card differently rather than it being like Valkyrie, where you pair it
Mhm.
with a 1 cost and that's the final move. Maybe the solution is to make Cannonball a weaker card. Maybe it's make it a target for Zabu. It could be the opposite direction of making it like a 6/11 and it's a huge swing winner because then whether it moves something or not, I mean, you've got this huge power swing and it's a guaranteed lane win without priority unless if it's an Alliance lane. So maybe there's something in there. I feel like they're onto something, but they never fully got there. Like they just ended up short with Cannonball, and I think they may have felt that way too because he was brought from 5/7 to 5/8, and then they got rid of the randomness and they made it the highest power card. Like there's
Yeah,
they're so close. Like there's something there. Just
right.
almost there. Almost. But I don't know. Give it time. Give it time. I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if they changed Cannonball because Clog is so prominent right now and control and lockdown is so prominent right now. And then all of that goes away. All of it. Every bit of it for at least a week because the new shiny toy War Machine also comes to the game, who is, in my opinion, the most hyped card of the season by
Yeah.
justifiable means. But you had Cannonball higher. So I'm not saying in comparison to Cannonball. I want to ask you, as someone who had War Machine on a lower end, why did you not rank War Machine higher than Cannonball? Because to me, I think you and I probably identified the exact same thing about War Machine if I had any guess.
Okay. Yeah, I think War Machine is severely overhyped, and I've heard creators say things like, "Clearly the best card this season." I'm like, clearly, like maybe, but uh, one of the most common things that I hear people list as a pro is he's a counter to lockdown. How much lockdown are you seeing? I realize the timing of that statement is not great because Professor X is on the rise, but
Yeah.
how much over the last 6 months? How much has lockdown been in the meta? Like beating lockdown is not a very big pro. And then people went wild for him once we heard that it works with Infinite. Like, okay, cool, he works with Infinite, but that's a big energy investment just to be able to play Infinite. And if you're spending that energy, you're not playing She-Hulk with Infinite. So like,
Mhm.
it's just I think Infinite is a trap. Um, I think he's a combo card, right? As you can't use him as build around. What you're gonna have a deck full of like Giganto, Crossbones, Ebony Maw, Infinite cards that have restrictions to play them. You're gonna have a deck full of them, and then when you don't run War Machine or when you don't draw War Machine, you're just toast. Like, I think he's just I don't know. I don't know if I touched on your key point in there at all, but to me, he just feels like a combo card that is a kind of expensive combo to set up. Not a lot of bang for your buck.
Okay. So I don't know if you know this. I know D Money does at this point, but every Thursday for me, the day that we're recording this, because we're recording this on a Thursday night, it always goes out on Friday mornings. Thursday is my what I dedicate as my YouTube day. So I'm always looking at the new cards in the future. I'm looking at, what's about to come up. I'm doing my research. I'm doing my, my deck creation. Like, so before this, about what time is it? About 4 or 5 hours ago, I recorded my War Machine video after sitting down and theory crafting out the wazoo about War Machine. And the more I started to look into War Machine, the more I consistently felt like he is a card you have to have in your collection, but not because he's OP. I, to me, the perfect equivalent of War Machine is Supergiant, where, in my opinion, Supergiant is a card you need to have in your collection for very specific metas when they arise, but then those metas disappear. It's like Luke Cage. You see
Yeah.
a bunch of affliction, you're going to start running a bunch of Luke Cage in your decks because you're trying to keep ahead of the meta. War Machine is exactly the same to me. It's a seasonal card. It's a card that we're seeing a bunch of
Mm.
lockdown mechanics. Okay, everybody starts playing War Machine again. I think it's one that opens up defense in the future, but offense in the now. Because you touched on a couple of key important
Yes.
cards here too, which is everybody's hung up on Ebony Maw and Infinite. And yes, those are amazing synergies. Let's not, sugarcoat it and say it that it's not. They're really good cards, really strong cards that you can now use differently because of this card. But to me, the card that makes War Machine actually work is Hope Summers. Because if you don't have Hope Summers, I built a bunch of decks with and without Hope Summers, and all of the ones I personally liked better were always with Hope Summers, where you're looking Hope on 3, War on 4. And that
Mhm.
synergy then opens up everything specifically, because now you're looking at Hope on 3, War on 4, Infinite 5, Taskmaster 6. That's when you're looking up different supergiant synergies of Hope on, you putting Hope on 3, Supergiant on 4, War Machine on 5 as a 4/6 is dead power. That's still damn good power. Using War Machine outside of it, the only thing that you're really trying to cheat out is Cull Obsidian into a lane that doesn't have a 1-cost card, Crossbones into any lane that you basically want. And to me, everybody's sleeping on one synergy in particular that I don't even think I've found the right way to run it yet. I made a couple of ongoing decks that run it, but I think the best synergy with War Machine is actually Goose, because Goose is an incredibly strong
Mhm.
card. And when
Yeah.
you made a Surfer deck, what was your 2-cost card most of the time? Goose, because you're protecting that lane. You can Goose now, leave that lane alone, War Machine on 4, and put a big 5-drop into that Goose lane, and all they can do is drop in their little dinky 2-cost cards every now and then. Like, there's a lot of cool synergies once I really started sitting down and looking at War Machine through those two scopes. But Hope Summers is the necessary piece, unfortunately, to making War Machine a very successful card. Black Knight decks, Hella decks, lockdown decks. I always found myself in good situations when I had 6 mana on 5 when running a War Machine deck, because War Machine at 4 cost feels awful. Awful. But if you
Mm.
play it with the mindset of having 6 energy, hang on now. Now I'm paying attention. Now I've got the idea that I can play a Giganto in the right lane for the first time ever on turn 5 as a 6/14. That's cool to me. And now I'm listening. So that's when I started really like, okay, because I sat for a while trying to figure out how am I going to make War Machine work outside of Infinite and outside of Ebony Maw. And it took me like 3 hours, no joke, sitting down and trying to figure out every possible manipulation way of using War Machine differently than what the devs have said to do, which is Ebony Maw and
Mm.
Infinite. And
Yeah.
it's amazing that after sitting down for so long, I still feel like I really need Hope Summers to make him very good. But I agree with you. I don't think he's the number 1 card this season. I think he's the most necessary card this season. And there's a big distinction difference because he's a long-term card. He's a card you're going to want to eventually have at some point. Because whether it's lockdown, whether it's ramp, whether it's whatever, he brings up some really cool synergies. I like him. I just, I'm a
Yeah.
little leery that people are going to go too all in on one idea with him, which is Infinite. I must Infinite. And that's it. Because there are great Infinite decks. I'm putting
Yeah.
one up on the screen right now for those in the YouTube side. This is what I'm calling the Ken special, because Super Tech God, you know how much he loves Infinite. So I made a deck in honor of him, but it's a Black Knight deck that features Giganto and Infinite and Hope Summers and War Machine, and it works great. And it's probably the deck I'm going to open with myself because it makes the most sense and hits all of those synergies that you want a Black Knight deck and an Infinite deck to hit. But then going around the opposite end of, well, can I find something a little bit more bizarre with War Machine? I get stuck in the ongoing world. He's a cool card, but I feel
Did you try Sauron at all?
no, I didn't go Sauron. I actually went Patriot. I did a Patriot build with him, kind of feeding
Mm,
into my Patriot and Junk deck, featuring the Junk package with Hood and Sentry and Annihilus, and then using Lockdown in that aspect, but still also having Infinite built into the deck. Like you said, targeting specifically with Daredevil. I threw Cannonball in there too for fun. Like it brought the hybrid combination of okay, War Machine on 4, but I also have Ebony Maw that I could play on out. If I didn't zero my Ebony Maw, I can instead now get my Ebony Maw down. Or, because zero is just a great card with Patriot in general, and people forget that all the
well,
time. A 4/10 Cull Obsidian is
mm,
always great,
yeah,
but it can be a 4/12 because you zeroed it in a Patriot deck. So trying to build these like hybrid combinations of using War Machine as a backup plan in case if your primary plan also doesn't come to be. Because if you go all in on War Machine, you're doing the deck wrong, in my opinion. I hate decks
yeah,
that are
I agree.
dependent on one card. You need 2 to 3 different play lines. Like Hella decks that are all in Hella decks, like you have no protection over your Invisible Woman. It's just get that combo and hope. That's not how you build a deck. So I like War Machine as a secondary plan in those types of builds. Like you said, with Sauron, that idea of removing the ongoings, similarly is how I'm doing it, but removing just abilities in general by focusing it towards a zero Patriot deck. That's what I did.
Yeah. So you mentioned using him to get Ebony Maw out early, or sorry, get Ebony Maw out late if you didn't zero it. I think it's also worth mentioning it works with Ebony Maw if you play Ebony Maw
Right,
early.
right,
War Machine should let you play into Ebony Maw, which is
right.
cool. Um, and yeah, I agree. Like Storon is one of the ones I brought up as I agree. Like War Machine, basically, I wrote down what you said. I said bad defensively, um, but I didn't add seasonally, which is correct. Like, yeah, he might be needed seasonally, but in general, he is a bad defensive card. Um, and then offensively, I think there will be decent versions of Sauron, Ramp, and Lockdown, but I don't know if any of those, the War Machine version, will be the best one.
Right.
I'd be very interested to find out. I like him as a backup plan, especially for Black Knight. That's cool.
Yeah, the Black Knight deck is probably the one that organically feeds into what War Machine wants to do automatically. So whether it's like you didn't get the Black Knight combo out, okay, you Ghost Rider the item back, and that was your only backup plan. Now War Machine is like your alternate backup plan, as weird as that sounds, but it's true because okay, maybe you didn't Lady Sif that Infinite, but you know what? You got a whole bunch of other random power out here on the board. Okay, sure. Let's now go ahead and put War Machine on 5 and drop down that big L Infinite on 6 if you want to do that. Or, as I said, you play it with Hope Summers in the deck, and then you can put it down on turn 5. Ta-da! Like it's there, there there's a lot of cool mechanics when you start really looking at also the locations in particular, which is why Goose even came into the conversation for me, because I think Goose may end up being the secret winner synergy wise with War Machine because you can play that plan early and deviate to that plan on turn 6 of, hey, I'm really behind in this, but I'm sitting on blank card I can put into the Goose lane because of War Machine on 5. Okay. That's a winning condition because your opponents are not expecting you to be able to put big enough power to catch up with that lane. So they sacrifice it. They said, I've got the lead. I'm going to play into my other condition lane win. And then here you go swinging over the top. So I think Goose is a secret winner. I still don't think anybody's going to play Crossbones. I really don't.
Yeah, nope.
I've tried. All the decks I made, not one of them included Crossbones. He needs to be a
Why wouldn't it
4/9.
be Cool Obsidian?
Call
Yeah.
Obsidian made a couple of decks because that's cool to me.
Uh-huh.
Is a like, hey, you got War Machine or you didn't. Okay, you have a good card to play down or a good card with open gates. That's just a win-win because War Machine at 4/6 is still really good. It's vanilla stats. It's good stat line. He's a good card. I just don't think He's going to have the win rate that a lot of people are going to expect him to have because everyone, myself included, have been saying, okay, like even in the Cannonball week, just skip Cannonball, save for War Machine. Get War Machine, everybody get War Machine. And I agree, you should get War Machine, but not for the reasons that people are talking about. I think you get War Machine because you need it in the first week that it's there, and then every couple of weeks, randomly. When the meta rises and you need to have War Machine in your deck, then you'll be glad you have him at that point. He's gonna be a necessary tech card for prevention in the future. Like you said, he's bad defensively. Yes, he'll be bad defensively the first week. But in the future, he's going to be exclusively defense because he's going to counter metas as they come up. Kind of like what Supergiant does, kind of like what Luke Cage does, etc. He's cool. I like him. But let's progress to one specific thing I wanted to talk about. I never on the podcast like to bring up a topic twice if I can avoid it. But I thought it was worth bringing up because there's one conversation I want to talk about when it comes to what we talked about last week, which was the Avengers versus X-Men event. Now, when we recorded this last week, we got information about the event. It was, for me, it was like noon that day. It went live at 3 that day. And then I had like 3 hours to mess with it. And I just thought, okay, this is cool. And I talked about it on the podcast with D-Money. And we were like, okay, sure, yeah, it's a cool, fun event. I don't know how meta breaking it's going to be or how important it is or like whatever. And then as the week progressed, the event grew and grew and grew on me. It gave me like, okay, you know what? Maybe I really do want to play into this. Maybe I really want to have a whole bunch of Avengers or a whole bunch of X-Men in my deck. I'm not sure, but I'm listening. And then you start seeing the decks. And then you start seeing creators create X-Men exclusive. And then D-Money climbs 200 snap points in top 200 infinite with an X-Men deck. And then you see all these creators with infinite tickets now because of X-Men decks. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I'm watching the results and I'm seeing the decks that are doing great. So I'm like, all right, I'll try one. I brought in Alex Coach's deck, his X-Men deck. Infinite ticket, Olympic style, all 5. I went silver and gold back to back, straight 5-0. Like it was nothing. I wasn't even thinking. I ran 12-1 with that deck between Proving Grounds testings and then that. Like, why is this so strong? So before I give my reason why I think it's so strong and why I have a very specific idea that this event proved to me of what I'd like to see happen with in the world of Marvel Snap. Did you have a similar experience? Yes, no, if not, why not?
Yes for X-Men. I don't. I personally never tried the Avengers one, which is maybe bad of me. But I was having so much fun with the X-Men. Uh, Lockdown is my favorite archetype, and the X-Men have Professor X and Storm, so like it was always going to be X-Men for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever saw anybody activate Avengers against me except for once, and that was Gamma Lab. So they
Yes.
had 3 wolves. Um, I don't know if the Avengers power was actually bad or if it was just it seemed so much harder, so people weren't even using it. Um, but yeah, I used X-Men deck to hit Infinite, and then had tons of success with it afterwards.
I felt like I'll agree with you. It was definitely Team X-Men over Team Avengers by a mile. Like it was so easy to make the X-Men ability proc off for all those +1s that it was, you could build a regular deck and hey, everybody just got random power. Like it was that easy to make that, synergy happen. I'll agree with you. The only time I specifically made Avengers work was Iron Man because you wanted
Mm.
that extra power in an Iron Man lane and it organically made sense. And you could move cards around
Yeah.
and in that aspect, then it worked. But Team X-Men 100% was the winner there. And I think the winner for me of why I like Team X-Men more wasn't actually Lockdown. It was because Alex Coach's deck opened my eyes to Silver Surfer. And Silver Surfer for me has always been, like my personal favorite archetype. I've just loved playing Surfer decks. I think they're so much fun. They're so flexible. You've got all of these other tech cards that perfectly integrate, and now we're getting more and more power cards that can integrate in there. So I've always enjoyed Surfer decks. And a Surfer X-Men deck did incredibly well. And and as I'm playing it, I'm looking at it going, why is this doing better than any other variation? It didn't even have Shaw in it. Like, we tried, everybody and their sister all tried running, Sebastian Shaw Surfer decks when Sebastian Shaw was a season pass. And it always did okay. It was like a good-ish cube gainer, kind of sorta, but it never like became the top number one deck. It was a season pass card that just integrated into a pretty okay archetype. It was a good B deck. But this felt like it was an A tier, S tier level deck. And I want to bring back the conversation of, we're always looking at the meta. We're always looking about being scared of certain cards being too powerful. To me, seeing what the X-Men Surfer deck in particular did for the scope of Marvel Snap, I think we can reinvest into the idea again that Silver Surfer giving +3 power to 3 cost cards like he did back when he first premiered. I think that actually now would hold water in today's power crept meta, because the X-Men deck proved that it can compete with top tier decks, but not be the top tier deck.
Yeah. I think that in general, there's a lot of scary power that's been lost that would be good to bring back.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Angela, Kitty,
Yeah, Angela,
those sorts of
definitely.
things. I don't know that I want Elsa with +3 back. That probably too
Not that
much.
much. No, no,
But
no, not that. No, that can die. That can stay
yeah,
dead. That
yeah,
there's no reason for that to ever come back again. But Surfer, with the amount of 3 cost cards, I nominate one of two changes. I nominate either A, Surfer goes back to giving +3s to the 3 cost cards, or B, Brood becomes a 3/3. Because the reason Brood is a 3/2 is because of Surfer. It got nerfed down. So I think bringing Brood's power back up to make that lane feel good again, maybe that's the balance of what Surfer needs, because Surfer needs just a little bit more body to those mid turns. And you can't just buff every 3 cost card, because every 3 cost card is then competing against a Zabud down 4 cost card. And that's a constant confliction. And that's, as we say, a topic for another cocktail. But I do
yeah.
think there are elements of Surfer decks that I found personally in from this event that made me realize that's what Surfer needs. It either needs Surfer to have the official +1 added back into its add-on, so it's a total of +3 per 3 cost card, or when I do play Brood and I am getting a big lane because of Brood, I need that lane to have more oomph to it. And Brood at 3/2, going to 3/4s in today's meta does not make sense. Going to 3/5s does.
But there's still Forge Brood out there, right?
Yeah. And so there's still Forge Brood abs,
Okay.
but does that compete? No,
Yeah. Okay, you're right. Yeah.
because they brought down, think about it, they brought down Absman because they were annoyed with how big those 2 Broodlings were. But if you put it into a completely separate lane, instead of having a 4/6 and then 2 other 4/6s that could be, sorry, 3/6s that'd be buffed up, that was a problem. So they switched that. They brought it down and brought it down, and 6s, 5s, whatever. And then now you look at actual base Brood, whether it has Forge or not. If you make it a 3/3, sure, that's a win lane condition, but Surfer still has to win a second lane. And it's not
Yeah.
easy to do unless if you have, the Gladiator plus the Shaw and the build up, but you still have to get all of that out on the board. And Forge Brood has been out there for a long time, no matter how expensive Forge has been, as a 1 cost, as a 2 cost, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It exists, but it's still not meta relevant. It could be though, with just a little tiny bit more power. Just 3 more power in that lane. And now you've got a competitive deck. A little more.
The brew change seems safer, although the surfer change seems more fun.
That's a good way to word it. It's a safer change, but it's definitely a lot more fun. I think that the X-Men Avengers event opened up my eyes to a couple of unique synergies, a couple of unique variations on the build, and it brought a fun element to the game that I wasn't necessarily directly expecting it to. I thought it was going to be annoying because they have it affect both Conquest and Ladder. And I definitely lost games because I forgot to check every single group of 70 frickin' X-Men that my opponent was playing. And then, oh, look, they all got a buff on turn 6. Like, nobody was getting that advanced with it that they knew specifically, okay, by turn 3, I'm going to have 3 X-Men on the board. And then by turn 5, I'll get my 4th one, which will give me prio onto turn 6. Nobody was doing that. Not one. But it definitely happened. And I definitely lost games because of it. And I think that that kind of synergy play of, groups of cards and cards that, kind of like what Thanos's stones do, right? You got all 6 down, you made a big thing happen. Do you think that this event opens up the conversation for the future? And this is what we'll kind of wrap the podcast with. Do you think that this opens up the possibility for Marvel Snap to say either A, we need a game mode exclusive to these features and these very specific tavern style events, or do we start seeing certain multi-card synergies like we saw with the X-Men in particular and the Avengers in particular be automatically integrated into certain core groups, like let's say the Guardians, which just got a buff? Imagine if there was an extra add-on where if you have all 5 Guardians on the board, all of them get +1 power.
Are you asking which one I'd prefer, or which is more realistic? Um,
Both. Which
Maybe
one do
it's
you
the same
prefer? Or which
answer.
one do you think is more
Yeah,
realistic? Does this event open up
I
either of those possibilities in reality as well as your own, wants and needs?
I like it being a separate queue. I think that's fun, especially if it's, which I understand is the case with the Tavern Brawl, is it's always active and you just get a different wild change every week. I think that that would be really fun, and I love deck building, and so giving big shakeups like that is interesting to me. Getting a completely different meta to play with. The fact that they are temporary, these imbalance patches, and like you were saying, like Surfer can compete, but it doesn't become the top deck. Like, I don't think it's that big of a deal if it takes over actual main game modes temporarily. I know some people hate it though, and so it's like, do you cater to those people? How much of the percentage of players does that represent? Um, Finally, like making it a permanent thing, I'm really not interested in, because I think it hurts deck building in the long run if you are so pushed to put these things together. Um, Although the strongest argument I've heard in favor of that, besides theming, is like, well, it makes it possible to play a bunch of cards that, like X-Men, a bunch of cards that maybe don't go the best together. They come from different archetypes, and now I can
Right.
actually play them together because the buff makes it possible to do so. That's the best argument I've heard in favor of making it a permanent thing.
If it's a smaller
But it
group,
would,
I think that, not a group of 70 plus whatever it was, cards for you to have to know 30 of these and 30 of these. Like, it has to be small groups. Like, a couple of Avengers in particular, or, kind of like what, you think of Black Bolt, you think of Stature, you think of an automatic duo, you think of the Guardians, you think of a group of cards, like that
yeah,
kind of a feel to it, which I know then you get all of the Marvel lore purists coming out talking, well, why do you do this but not do this? Which is always an interesting conversation. No, it's not. It's, to me, it's the game, like you said, when it comes to lore, the game mechanics has to come first. What works best in the scope
yes,
of the game? So at sometimes, and it's just like in filmmaking, sometimes lore gets sacrificed for the greater source of the entertainment. And I think that's what's potentially going to happen with, the results of these kinds of events. Because who knows what they're going to spring on us in April with some kind of event. We'll probably get another, non-balance patch event at some point. And if so, hey, bring it on. Just give us more than 2 hours of advance notice. But I love I love the notion of these events. I think that it's fun seeing these extra synergies. And now that we've had cards changed, we have crazy radical new cards, and we're starting to do things in Marvel Snap and stretch the limits of what cards were able to do. We're getting into locations we could never get in before. We're transforming and breaking cards that we've never been able to do before. We are flying all across the battlefield. We're making stones 2 cost. Like, Marvel Snap is in a huge change mode right now. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. They've always done good by these balances and these changes and these add-ons. So I'm optimistic about what next season's going to bring, as well as for reasons I won't discuss here yet publicly. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, more to come. Ooh, ooh, little teaser. But I'll say, Lauren, to you, I'm so glad I had you here this week to talk Cannonball and War Machine and all of this chaos, because you've got different experience in this community than most of us. So if those who have enjoyed this podcast have never seen your content before, have never heard your content, have never read your content before, please let the listeners and, viewers, watchers know where they can find you.
Okay. Find me on SnapZone. Probably the easiest way is to Google Lauren whatever SnapZone. You'll find it. Um, and then I'm most active on Twitter at LaurenWhatevs. I post there quite a lot, I don't know, once or twice a day, and plenty of analytic, tiny micro articles end up on Twitter,
Mhm.
and then I get yelled at by Pulse Glazer about not getting paid for those. Um, but I can't help it. I just, like, my brain gets stuck on something interesting. And I'm like, I'm gonna explore this, and then by the time I'm like, this is a 5 post article. But yeah,
Character
check me out there,
limits.
and I
I know.
will let you know. Yeah, I'll let you know when I post interesting Snap Zone full length article. I have something coming very soon. It's like a whole review of recent changes to the economy, how card acquisition is getting more expensive, and it includes an interview with Steven Jarrett from
Ooh.
Second Dinner. I'm hoping I can have it out by the end of the week.
Well, stay tuned. We'll make sure. I know I'll definitely be reading and resharing that one as well. Make sure you follow her over on X/Twitter, or take a look at all of her content over on Marvel Snap Zone. Lauren, thank you so much for being here once again. This is the Beyond Infinite podcast. Greatly appreciate you listening on in. D Money might be back next week. Keyword might, not sure. But if not, who knows? Maybe Lauren will be then too. Thank you all so much for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day.